When I was 13, back in 2012, something happened on Halloween that still messes with my head. I remember it clearly because I was looking forward to a typical night of trick-or-treating with my friends, Max, Theo, and Lou. We decided to meet at my place since it was just a block away from a nice neighborhood where people gave out the best candy. Our plan was simple: start on my street, hit up the good houses, and then check out the quieter side of town. Before we left, Lou mentioned he had brought some snacks he got from his cousin. So, like the silly kids we were, we decided to enjoy them a bit in the alley behind my house before we headed out. The first hour went great. We filled our bags with candy and then crossed into the fancy neighborhood. By the time we were on our way back, most houses had turned off their lights, signaling the end of trick-or-treating. We figured we had enough candy, but just as we were about to turn back, we noticed one house still lit up at the end of a row of identical townhouses. It felt a little strange, but we wanted more candy, so we went up the steps and rang the doorbell. After a minute, we heard heavy footsteps inside. When the door finally opened, a man in his mid-40s stood there. He wore an old stained t-shirt and some worn-out shorts, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was messy, and he smelled a bit odd, but he smiled and seemed friendly. He joked about how we must be the only kids still out trick-or-treating and said we deserved a special treat. Then he went inside to get us some snacks. We didn't think much of it, maybe because we were still a little giggly, so we stood around chatting, hoping for full-size candy bars or something cool. After what felt like ages, the guy came back, but instead of candy, he held a stack of black DVD cases, grinning like he had just found treasure. He fanned them out like a deck of cards and told us to pick whichever ones we wanted. His smile was way too wide, and his teeth looked pretty yellow. I remember thinking I'd never seen teeth that looked like that before. We looked at the covers, and our excitement turned to shock. These weren't regular movies. They were adult films. Some didn't even have women on them. Max muttered something about just wanting candy, hoping the guy would get the hint, but his grin only got bigger, his jagged teeth glinting in the porch light. "Nah, I get it," he said. "Boys your age have other interests. It's cool. You can trust me. Come on, don't be shy." We started backing away slowly, trying to keep calm. I forced a polite smile, but it all felt wrong. Just as I was about to say we should leave, the guy made a move that made us really uncomfortable. He kept talking, saying we could come in, eat all the candy we wanted, and watch some cool movies with him. Every word made my skin crawl. Without saying another word, we bolted off the porch. Our candy bags thumped against our sides as we ran. My legs burned, but I didn't dare look back until we were halfway down the street. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, I saw him standing at the edge of his driveway, watching us. He took a few slow steps after us, then stopped, shaking his head and stumbling back inside. We kept running until we reached the main road that led back to my house. We didn't slow down until we were safely inside, practically falling over ourselves as we scrambled down the steps to the basement door. We burst in, panting and laughing nervously, still high on adrenaline. For a long time, none of us said anything. We just stared at each other, trying to process what had just happened. Theo finally broke the silence, asking if maybe the snacks had made everything seem weirder than it really was. But deep down, we all knew that guy was off. We joked about how creepy it was, trying to make it seem less real. But we were also angry that someone like him thought he could do that to us. The next day, when the shock wore off and the sunlight made us feel braver, we decided to get a little revenge. We grabbed some leftover eggs from the fridge and marched back to his house in the afternoon. We let loose on his porch and windows, splattering yolk everywhere. We didn't stick around to see if he was home. We just threw the eggs, laughed, and ran off. After that, we never went back to that block on Halloween. And even now, when someone mentions trick-or-treating, all I can think about is that guy's creepy smile and how quickly a fun night turned into something that still gives me chills. It was the last week of October when I found myself back in my small hometown, filled with strange stories and secrets. My friends, Mia, Jake, and Noah, wanted to explore an area known as the Forgotten Woods. People said it had a dark history. A long time ago, a family disappeared without a trace, leaving only echoes of their laughter in the trees. As the sun began to set, we walked into the woods, the light fading behind the thick branches. The air felt cold, and a strange silence surrounded us. Our flashlights flickered, casting shadows that danced in the dark. We exchanged nervous glances, feeling the weight of the legends pressing down on us. "Let's tell some scary stories," Mia suggested, trying to lighten the mood. We settled in a small clearing, sharing stories that grew scarier with each turn. But when Jake began telling the tale of the lost family, things shifted. "They say the mother used to sing lullabies to her kids at night," he said quietly. "If the wind is right, you can still hear her voice." As he finished, a chill ran down my spine. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves like a whisper. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew something was off. Then we heard it, a soft melodic humming that echoed through the trees. "Is that the lullaby?" Noah whispered, fear and curiosity in his voice. We looked at each other, wide-eyed. With our flashlights pointed toward the sound, we crept deeper into the woods, following the melody. The trees closed in around us, their twisted branches reaching out like hands, urging us to turn back. But we couldn't stop ourselves. We were drawn to the voice. After what felt like forever, we found a clearing bathed in a strange glow. In the center stood a rundown cabin, its dark windows staring at us like empty eyes. The humming grew louder, filling the air with an eerie feeling. We froze, caught between fascination and fear. "Should we go inside?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the humming stopped suddenly. A heavy silence fell, and it felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for us to decide. Shadows seemed to close in, making me uneasy. Then we heard a soft voice from the cabin. "Help us." It was gentle yet desperate, sounding just like the lullaby we had heard. My heart raced, torn between fear and the urge to help whoever, or whatever, was inside. "No way, that's too creepy," Jake said, stepping back. "We should go back." But something pushed me to step forward. "Maybe we can find out what happened to the family," I suggested, though my voice was shaky. Just as I reached for the cabin door, a loud crash rang out through the woods, making us jump. The ground shook beneath our feet, and the air felt electric. I caught glimpses of shadows moving in the trees. "Let's get out of here!" Noah shouted, panic spreading. We didn't need any more encouragement. We turned and ran back through the woods, the dark trees closing in on us. As we ran, the sound of laughter, childlike and happy, followed us, mixing with the rustling leaves. I glanced back, half expecting to see the lost family behind us. But instead, the woods swallowed us in darkness, their whispers echoing in my ears. Finally, we burst out of the trees, gasping for breath as we collapsed onto the grass just outside the woods. The laughter faded, leaving us in an unsettling silence. We shared terrified looks, realizing what we had just experienced. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had barely escaped something much worse than just stories. The laughter echoed in my mind, and the haunting lullaby invaded my dreams. The forgotten woods kept their secrets close, and I knew we might have awakened something that should have stayed hidden. From that night on, I understood why they called it the Forgotten Woods. Some stories are meant to stay untold, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. Growing up in the small town of Alder Creek, Halloween was more than just a holiday for me. It was a chance to explore the spooky woods behind our neighborhood. One legend we heard as kids was about Foggy Hollow, a misty area that people said was cursed. The story was about a woman named Eliza who disappeared one night, and they said you could still hear her cries in the fog on cold October nights. The night before Halloween, my friends, Liam, Sarah, and I, decided we had to check out Foggy Hollow for ourselves. We grabbed flashlights, some snacks, and a little bit of courage, though I could feel the nerves building inside me. As we got closer to the woods, the air felt thicker, almost like it was trying to wrap around us. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, glancing back at our town's lights, which looked small and far away now. The dark felt heavy around us. "Come on, it's just a story," I said, trying to sound brave. "What's the worst that could happen?" Once we stepped into the fog, everything changed. The trees looked huge, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Our laughter faded into an uneasy silence. only broken by the sound of branches cracking under our feet. The air felt heavier, buzzing with a strange energy that made my skin tingle. We walked deeper into the woods until we found a small clearing with a pond that reflected the moonlight. "Let's take a break," Liam suggested, relieved to sit on a fallen log. Then we heard it, a soft humming like a lullaby hanging in the air. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just the wind," I said, but deep down I felt a chill run down my spine. We looked at each other, our hearts racing. Suddenly, the fog around us thickened. A cold breeze swept through, and the humming got louder, echoing all around us. It felt like the ground was vibrating with the sound, and shadows danced in the corners of my vision. "Let's get out of here!" Liam shouted, jumping up. But before we could move, the water in the pond started rippling, and a figure appeared. Her face was hidden in the mist, but I could see her hair floating around her like seaweed, and her eyes were dark and empty. She spoke with a voice full of sadness that sent shivers through me. "Help me find my children," she begged, her arms reaching out toward us. Panic hit me, and I knew we had to run. We pushed through the fog as it closed in behind us. The forest twisted and turned, making it feel like we were running in circles. The humming changed into cries that echoed through the trees. Finally, we burst back into the open air, the town lights guiding us home. We ran until we reached my house, breathing hard and wide-eyed with fear. We collapsed on the porch, our hearts racing, trying to understand what just happened. "We can't tell anyone," Sarah gasped, her voice shaking. "They'll think we're crazy." But the memory of that night stayed with us, a dark secret we carried forever. The legends of Foggy Hollow became more than just stories. They turned into a terrifying reality that haunted us. From that Halloween on, I never saw the woods the same way again. The fog felt like it whispered secrets of lost souls, and I learned that some stories are better left in the dark where they belong. Every year, when the leaves changed and the air got chilly, I felt a shiver whenever I passed those woods, reminding me of what was hidden in the fog. It was a chilly Halloween night when my friends and I decided to explore Grimsby Manor, an old estate that everyone said was haunted. The manor sat at the edge of our town, surrounded by twisted trees that seemed to whisper secrets. There was a story about a terrible fire that had happened years ago, taking the lives of the family who lived there, and people believed their spirits still roamed the place. My friends, Jason, Mia, and I gathered our flashlights and snacks, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. As we approached the creaking gates, the air grew colder and a thick fog rolled in, wrapping around the manor like a ghostly blanket. "Are we really doing this?" Mia asked, her voice shaking a little. "Absolutely," Jason said with a grin. "What's a little ghost hunting among friends?" Feeling a bit braver, we pushed open the gates and walked down the overgrown path to the front door. It creaked as we entered, and a musty smell filled the air. Dust danced in the light from our flashlights, showing us the faded beauty of the old living room. We explored room after room, laughing and having fun, but things changed as we went deeper into the house. The air felt colder, and shadows flickered just out of sight. Then I heard it, a soft whisper like a voice carried by the wind. "Help us, find peace." I froze, chills running down my spine. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, looking at my friends, who seemed unsure. "Hear what?" Jason shrugged, trying to act casual. "Probably just the wind." But I knew it wasn't. The whisper stuck in my mind, pulling me forward. We climbed the staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath us. On the second floor, we saw a door slightly open, a flickering light spilling into the hallway. Mia pushed the door open, and we found a small, dusty room filled with old toys and a dollhouse. "This must have been a child's room," she said quietly. But as we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us, leaving us in darkness. Panic hit me. "Let us out!" I shouted, banging on the door. Just then, the flickering light brightened, and in the corner I saw a ghostly figure, a young girl in a torn dress, her eyes wide with sadness. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "They don't know." Before I could do anything, the room filled with cries, the voices of the lost children who had died in the fire. We huddled together, terrified as shadows pressed in around us. "I want to leave," Jason yelled, pounding on the door. Suddenly, the door swung open, and we stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. The whispers faded, but the sadness lingered, filling us with a heavy feeling. We raced down the stairs, through the manor, and burst outside into the cold night air, not daring to look back. As we reached the gates, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the girl standing in the window, her face full of despair. We walked home in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. That night changed us, binding us in a silent promise of shared fear. From that day on, the legend of Grimsby Manor meant more to us. It wasn't just a ghost story. It reminded us of the past and the souls still searching for peace. And every Halloween, I could still hear the whispers of the children echoing through the fog, urging us to remember the stories of those lost in the shadows. Every October, my friends and I get excited for our Halloween camping trip in Willow Creek, a place known for spooky legends. The stories always give me chills, but this year I felt a strong urge to explore deeper into the woods. We arrived just before sunset. The trees cast long, creepy shadows as we set up our camp. The air was filled with excitement, but I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. After dinner, we gathered around the fire, telling ghost stories and joking about each other's fears. "Did you guys hear about the old woman who disappeared here decades ago?" Alex asked, his eyes shining in the firelight. "They say she still wanders these woods looking for her lost family." Everyone laughed, but a chill ran down my spine. As night fell, we decided to venture deeper into the woods with only our flashlights. The trees towered over us, and the darkness swallowed our light, creating a thick silence. Suddenly, I heard a faint sobbing in the distance. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The others nodded, curiosity and fear on their faces. "Let's check it out," Alex urged, leading the way with his flickering flashlight. With each step, the sobbing grew louder, winding through the trees like a ghostly song. I felt a shiver run down my back but pushed forward, unable to resist the urge to find out what it was. When we reached a clearing, we found an old worn stone well surrounded by twisted roots and thorny bushes. The sobbing was now clearer, echoing around us. My heart raced as I leaned over the edge, my flashlight revealing only darkness. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the shadows, a frail old woman with sunken eyes, her dress torn and dirty. "Help me find them," she whispered, her voice sounding like a distant memory. Panic shot through me, and I turned to run, but my feet felt heavy. "Wait!" Alex shouted, but I was already sprinting back to camp, branches scratching my arms and face. I could hear the woman's voice behind me, mixing with the howling wind. "Don't leave me. I'm so alone." When I finally reached our campsite, I leaned against a tree, gasping for air. The others came in soon after, their faces pale and scared. "What was that?" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide. We gathered around the fire, adrenaline pumping through us. We debated what we had seen, but deep down, I knew we had to leave. The woods felt alive, and the old woman's presence hung over us like a dark cloud. As we hurried to pack up, I glanced back at the dark trees where shadows moved in the flickering light. That's when I saw her again, standing just beyond the tree line, her hollow eyes locked onto mine, silently pleading for help. Without saying a word, we raced to our cars, hearts pounding as we drove away from Willow Creek. I could still hear her voice echoing in my mind. Every Halloween since then, I remember that night, the haunting of Willow Creek. I'll never forget the chilling reminder that some spirits linger, trapped between the living and the dead, forever searching for what they've lost. As a kid, I loved visiting my grandparents' house near Whispering Woods. The people in town said the forest was full of secrets, telling stories about lost souls and ancient spirits. Every Halloween, the tales got crazier, but it wasn't until last year that I really understood. Last October, I wanted to explore those woods again with my best friend Tom. We brought flashlights and a sense of adventure and stepped into the forest as the sun was setting. The air smelled damp and shadows seemed to dance among the trees. "Remember the story about the lady in white?" Tom asked, trying to break the spooky silence. I nodded, recalling how the townsfolk talked about a woman who had lost her child and roamed the woods searching for him, her cries echoing through the night. As we walked deeper, we began to hear whispers, soft at first, like leaves rustling. But as we went further, the voices grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand. A chill ran down my back. "Did you hear that?" I asked, gripping my flashlight tightly. "Yeah, it sounded like someone crying," Tom said, his voice shaking a little. We kept going, curiosity pushing us forward despite the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Suddenly, we found an old, run-down cabin hidden among the trees. Its windows were broken, and vines climbed the walls like fingers reaching for something lost. "Let's check it out," Tom suggested, his adventurous spirit winning over his fear. Inside, the air was musty, and the floor creaked under our feet. Dust floated in the beams of our flashlights as we explored. Then we heard it, a soft sobbing coming from the back room. I exchanged a nervous glance with Tom. "Should we get closer?" I whispered, but before I could finish, he was already moving toward the sound. My heart raced as I followed, feeling a mix of dread and excitement. As we entered the room, a heavy sadness filled the air. A figure stood in the corner, her back to us, wearing a long white dress. "Help me find him," she murmured, her voice breaking the silence like glass shattering. "Who?" I managed to ask, but before we could step closer, the room turned cold, and the lights flickered. The figure turned, revealing hollow eyes filled with deep sorrow. A chilling wind swept through the cabin, blowing out our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed Tom's arm, pulling him back. "We need to leave." "Now!" I shouted. We stumbled over debris, our hearts racing as we ran back outside into the moonlit night. The whispers grew louder around us as we sprinted toward the edge of the woods. Just as we thought we were free, I glanced back. The woman in white stood at the cabin's door, her gaze locked onto mine, her sobs echoing in my ears. We burst into a clearing, breathless and terrified. The whispers faded, leaving only the sound of our heavy breathing. "What just happened?" Tom gasped, his face pale. "I don't know, but we're never coming back here again," I said, still shaken. That night, I realized that some stories are more than just tales. They're warnings, echoes of sadness that linger where the living and the lost meet. From that day on, Whispering Woods changed in my mind from a place of childhood wonder to a realm of caution, where spirits of the past whisper their secrets in the dark. When I was a kid, my friends and I were always curious about the old Maple Grove Cemetery on the edge of our small town. People said it was haunted, filled with restless spirits and strange happenings. With Halloween coming up, we couldn't resist exploring this spooky place. One cool October evening, I gathered my friends, Jake, Mia, and Ryan, and we decided to go into the cemetery after dark. We took flashlights and a bag of snacks and climbed over the old iron gate, which creaked loudly as we stepped onto the overgrown path. The air felt chilly, and the moonlight made the tombstones look eerie, standing like guards over the resting souls. As we walked further into the cemetery, the wind seemed to whisper the names on the gravestones. "Look at that one," Jake said, pointing to an old stone that had crumbled with age. "It's like something out of a horror movie." We laughed nervously, but I felt a chill run down my spine. We made our way to the center of the cemetery, where a huge oak tree stood, its twisted branches reaching out like bony fingers. People said this tree was the heart of the cemetery, where spirits gathered. I had heard that if you stood under it at midnight and listened closely, you could hear the voices of the dead. We were intrigued, so we decided to try it. We huddled under the tree, its rough bark scratching my back as I leaned against it. When the clock struck midnight, everything went quiet, and the only sound was our breathing. Suddenly, we heard a rustling noise, and our flashlights flickered. "What was that?" Mia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just the wind," Ryan said, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. I wasn't so sure. It felt like someone was watching us. We listened closely and were surprised to hear soft whispers, as if the ground beneath us was alive with stories. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. Everyone nodded, their eyes wide. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a haunting song. Then a cold wind rushed through the cemetery, sending leaves flying into the air. A chill ran down my spine, and fear tightened in my chest. Before I could react, I saw a shadow dart past us out of the corner of my eye. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Panic set in, and we knew it was time to leave. We turned to run, but stumbled over the uneven ground, almost tripping over a forgotten gravestone. As we rushed back to the entrance, I looked back one last time. That's when I saw her, a figure in a flowing white dress standing beneath the oak tree, her hair flowing like a waterfall. I couldn't see her face, but her presence felt sad and heavy, pulling at my heart. I froze for a moment, feeling like she was asking for help. But before I could understand, Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me back to reality. "Run!" he shouted, and we dashed through the iron gate, breathless and terrified. Once we were back under the streetlights, we stopped to catch our breath. "What just happened?" Mia gasped, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but I swear I saw someone," I said, still shaken. We all agreed to keep our experience a secret, worried that talking about it would only bring more trouble. The next day, I couldn't shake the memory of the woman in white. A mix of fear and curiosity pushed me to research the cemetery's history. I found out that many years ago, a woman had lost her child in a terrible accident and was buried in Maple Grove. The legend said she never left, wandering the cemetery looking for her lost son. From that day on, I stayed away from the cemetery, but the memory of that night stuck with me. Halloween came and went, but the whispers and the shadowy figure were still fresh in my mind. I learned that sometimes curiosity takes you to places you shouldn't go, and some spirits are better left alone. Growing up in a small town, there was a creepy old house on Maple Street that everyone talked about. It was at the end of a long, twisting road, hidden behind thick trees and vines. People said it was haunted and had a sad past. No one ever went near it, except for me. With Halloween coming, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to explore that scary house. On a cold October night, I invited my brave friends Anna, Mark, and Sam to join me. We grabbed flashlights and a camera, hoping to catch something spooky. As we walked up to the house, I felt a chill run down my spine. The porch creaked loudly under our feet, and the front door was slightly open, like it was inviting us inside. We exchanged nervous glances but stepped inside anyway. The air was stale and smelled old, like no one had lived there for a long time. The walls had faded photos of people who looked like they were staring right at us, almost pleading for help. As we went deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. "Do you hear that?" Anna whispered. I listened carefully and heard a soft tapping noise, like someone was drumming their fingers. It seemed to be coming from upstairs. Our hearts racing, we decided to check it out. As we climbed the creaky stairs, the tapping got louder. At the top, we found a long hallway with closed doors. The noise was loudest behind a door at the end of the hall. My heart raced as I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, and I pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dark room filled with dust-covered furniture. In the center was an old, fancy mirror that was cracked and dirty. The tapping had stopped. I felt drawn to the mirror, and as I got closer, I saw something in the glass, a shadowy outline of a woman, her face hidden. Suddenly, the air turned icy, and the door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in, and we scrambled for our flashlights. When we turned them on, the mirror was empty. The woman was gone, but the room felt heavy with sadness. "Let's get out of here," Mark shouted. I nodded and we rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. We pulled and pushed, our hearts racing. Then, as quickly as it had closed, the door swung open by itself. We stumbled into the hallway, breathless and terrified. The tapping returned, now sounding like a loud pounding all around us. We ran down the stairs, the air thick with fear. As we burst out the front door, I looked back and saw a glimpse of the woman in the mirror, watching us with a sad, warning look. Once we reached the safety of the street, we didn't stop until we got to the town square. We fell onto a bench trying to catch our breath. "What just happened?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but I feel like we disturbed something," I said, still shaken from the experience. The house on Maple Street became a ghost story for my friends. But for me, it was a haunting reminder of that night when we faced the unknown. I learned that some places hold memories that are too painful to remember, and curiosity can lead you to things you might never forget. From that night on, I never went back to the house, but every Halloween, I'd glance down Maple Street, feeling the weight of its secrets lingering in the shadows. When I was a teenager, everyone in our small town talked about Ashwood Manor. It was an old Victorian house on the edge of town, and it had been empty for years. My friends and I heard stories about strange noises and ghosts that lived there, which made our imaginations run wild. Every Halloween, more and more people dared each other to explore the manor, but it wasn't until one unforgettable night that we finally decided to check it out. It was a chilly October evening when I gathered my friends, Lily, Jake, and Emily, at my house. As night fell, we got our flashlights and tried to act brave, feeling both excited and scared. The air felt electric as we walked toward Ashwood Manor, the shadows of the trees stretching long and dark around us. When we got to the house, it stood tall, but looked very old and neglected. The windows were broken, and the door was slightly open, creaking like it wanted us to come in. With a nod to each other, we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and it smelled musty. Our lights lit up the peeling wallpaper, showing old furniture covered with white sheets and broken picture frames leaning crookedly. As we wandered around the ground floor, we heard whispers echoing in the halls. At first, I thought it was just our minds playing tricks on us, but as we moved further in, the whispers got louder, almost urgent. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Just then, a loud bang came from upstairs, making us jump. It sounded like something had fallen, and our curiosity pushed aside our fear. We climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the quiet. At the top, we found a door at the end of the hall that was slightly open, with flickering lights spilling into the dark corridor. Our hearts raced as we approached the door. I hesitated, feeling a chill down my spine. Jake pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with dusty mirrors and cobwebs. In the middle was an antique chandelier, its crystals swaying gently like something was moving nearby. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. Panic hit us as we rushed to turn the doorknob, but it wouldn't open. We were trapped. The whispers turned into creepy laughter, echoing all around. A cold breeze swept through the room and the chandelier began to sway wildly. "Let us out!" Lily cried, her voice shaking. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but the laughter only got louder. Then I saw something move in the mirror. A shadowy figure stood behind us, its face hidden, watching us with a wicked smile. My heart raced. In a panic, I turned to my friends, and we all pushed against the door with all our strength. Finally, the door gave way, and we fell into the hallway, gasping for air. But when we looked back, the room was gone. The door looked solid, as if it had never existed. We ran down the stairs and out of the house, the laughter still ringing in our ears. Once outside, we collapsed on the grass, the cold air biting at our skin. "What just happened?" Jake asked, still breathing hard. "I don't know, but I'm never going back in there," I said, shaking from fear and adrenaline. We shared nervous laughter, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imaginations, but deep down, we all knew we had faced something we couldn't understand. As we walked home, I glanced back at Ashwood Manor. The windows seemed to sparkle with a life of their own, and the whispers returned, softer now but still full of longing. That night I learned that some places keep their past alive, and some spirits won't let go. From that day on, I never talked about what happened that night, but I could never forget it. Ashwood Manor became a haunting memory, a reminder that curiosity can lead to things better left alone. Each Halloween, the whispers of Ashwood Manor echoed in my mind, and I found myself wondering about the secrets hidden behind its walls. It was a moonlit October night when my friends and I decided to explore Hollow Hill, a local legend known for its creepy stories about ghosts and strange happenings. We had heard tales of eerie whispers and shadows hiding in the trees, and our group, me, Jenna, Lucas, and Mia, felt both excited and nervous. We got to the base of the hill just after sunset, ready with flashlights and a sense of adventure. The air was cool, filled with the smell of fallen leaves and a hint of something mysterious. As we climbed, the path twisted and turned, surrounded by trees that seemed to close in on us. With each step, the wind whispered, making it sound almost like voices, which made us even more uneasy. When we reached the top, the view was amazing. The town below sparkled with lights, but the atmosphere felt heavy around us. Jenna suggested we sit for a moment to take it all in. As we did, the air seemed to get colder. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us, and my heart started to race. Did anyone else hear that? Lucas whispered, breaking the silence. We all paused and listened closely. In the stillness, faint murmurs echoed through the trees, vague but unsettling. It's probably just the wind, I said, trying to calm my own growing anxiety. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move between the trees. Mia gasped, and we all pointed our flashlights at it. But nothing was there. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Let's go check it out, Jenna suggested, her voice shaky. Even though I felt uneasy, my curiosity got the best of me, and I nodded. We ventured deeper into the woods, where the trees loomed like silent guards, their branches reaching up to the night sky. As we walked, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around us like a thick fog. I looked at my friends, and they seemed both excited and scared. This is a bad idea, I finally said, but before I could suggest we turn back, we stumbled into a clearing. In the middle was an old, run-down cabin with dark, foreboding windows. We have to check it out, Lucas insisted, moving toward the cabin with eagerness I didn't feel. The door creaked open, almost as if it was inviting us in. Against my better judgment, we stepped inside, our flashlights revealing dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper. As we explored, the whispers got louder, echoing in the corners of the cabin. We shouldn't be here, Mia whispered, her voice shaking with fear. Just then, we heard a loud bang from above us, and our flashlights flickered. We bolted for the door, adrenaline pumping through our veins. As we rushed out, I glanced back and saw a shadow darting through the dark inside the cabin. Run! I shouted, and we sprinted down the hill, the whispers trailing behind us like a chilling song. When we finally reached the safety of the road, we collapsed against the car, breathless and terrified. The whispers faded into the night, leaving us with a deep feeling that Hollow Hill held secrets we were never meant to uncover. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the dark shape of the hill, knowing that whatever was hidden there would remain secret, waiting for the next curious souls to discover its haunting mystery. It was one of those chilly October evenings when my friends and I decided to go on an adventure. The air was filled with the smell of fallen leaves and the winter, and the full moon lit up the landscape in a spooky way. Sarah, Mike, Danny, and I had heard a lot of stories about Oakwood Forest, a place said to be haunted by spirits of people who had mysteriously disappeared there. Each story only made us want to explore it more. Even though I was getting anxious, I also felt excited. When we parked the car at the edge of the forest, I took a moment to look at the dark trees reaching up to the night sky. Are you ready for this? I asked my friends. They all nodded eagerly and playfully pushed each other. As we walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of the city faded away, replaced by rustling leaves and distant owl calls. The moonlight flickered through the branches, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on our minds. My heart raced with every snap of a twig beneath my feet. I felt both scared and thrilled. Every little noise made me feel alive. After wandering for what felt like hours, we found an old, run-down cabin that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It looked abandoned, with peeling paint and cracked windows. Should we go in? Mike asked, his curiosity showing. I hesitated, feeling uneasy, but the thrill of exploring pushed us inside. We opened the creaky door and stepped into the cabin. The air was stale, and dust floated in the beams of light coming through the windows. We shone our flashlights around, revealing cobwebs and old furniture covered in sheets. A chill ran down my spine because it was so quiet, as if the cabin had its own heartbeat, waiting for something or someone. As we moved deeper into the cabin, Danny whistled. "Check this out," he said, pointing to a cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. My reflection looked strange, distorted by the dark corners of the room. Just then, I thought I heard a soft whisper, like a distant voice carried by the wind. My heart raced, and I looked at my friends. "Did you hear that?" I asked quietly. They shrugged it off, laughing, but I felt something unsettling in the air. The hairs on my neck stood up. Ignoring my instincts felt wrong, but I didn't want to ruin the fun. Then Danny spotted a creepy old doll lying on the floor. Its button eyes seemed to watch us, and I felt a deep sense of dread. "Let's take it with us," he joked, picking it up with a grin. I rolled my eyes, but I felt uneasy. "Maybe we should just leave it," I suggested. But my warning was ignored as Danny tucked the doll under his arm. As we kept exploring, I suddenly heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. It echoed through the cabin and sent us all into a panic. Without thinking, we ran for the door, adrenaline rushing through us. My heart pounded as I glanced back at the darkness we were leaving behind. Once outside, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The cool night air felt good against my flushed cheeks, but the fear didn't go away. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I looked back at the cabin. It felt alive, like it wanted us there. As we walked back to the car, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see something hiding in the shadows. The forest felt different now, scarier than before. I sensed that we had stirred up something that should have stayed undisturbed. We got into the car and sat in silence, listening to the rustling leaves outside. As we drove away, I glanced back one last time. The cabin stood there, dark and menacing, its windows like empty eyes watching us leave. The stories I had laughed at suddenly felt too real. Had we disturbed a spirit? Had we brought something back with us? The rest of the night flew by in a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of the forest and the cabin. I struggled to shake off the feeling that we weren't alone, that whatever lingered in Oakwood was still with us. I finally fell asleep, but dreams of the forest haunted me, leaving me restless and anxious. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I decided to take a walk to clear my head, but as I stepped outside, I noticed the air felt different. It was as if the world had shifted overnight, and a strange silence surrounded everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us home. That night, as I lay in bed, the memories of the cabin flooded my mind. Every creak in the house made me jump, and I found myself checking the shadows in my room. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, too quiet to understand, but close enough to make my skin crawl. Panic shot through me, and I sat up in bed, staring into the dark corners of my room, my heart racing. I had to face the truth. Oakwood Forest had left its mark on me. I didn't want to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but I knew something had changed that night. The stories were real, and I was no longer just a curious adventurer. I was part of a tale that lingered in the shadows, waiting for its next chapter to unfold. I grew up in a small town surrounded by rolling hills, and I often heard stories about Hollow Creek. People said it was cursed. As Halloween approached, my friends and I decided to find out if the stories were true. I gathered my courage and invited Sarah, Mark, and Jenny to join me on this spooky adventure. One chilly evening, we set out with flashlights, ready for exploration. The sun had just disappeared, leaving everything in darkness. As we walked, we could hear the sound of water flowing in the creek, and a chill hung in the air. According to the stories, Hollow Creek used to have a small village that vanished overnight, leaving only whispers behind. People said the spirits of the villagers still roamed the area, searching for their lost home. As we walked deeper into the woods, I could feel the weight of those stories pressing down on us. After walking for an hour through thick bushes, we finally found the creek. Its water sparkled under the moonlight, but something felt wrong. The air got heavy, and the gentle sounds of the water turned into unsettling whispers. My heart raced as I looked at my friends. Their faces showed a mix of excitement and fear. "Did you guys hear that?" Jenny asked, her voice shaking. We all nodded, suddenly feeling the need to go back. But then Mark pointed to an old stone bridge that crossed the creek. "Let's check it out," he said, his eyes shining with mischief. Even though my instincts told me to turn back, the excitement was too strong to ignore. As we crossed the bridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but it felt like unseen eyes were following me. On the other side of the bridge, we found the remains of what looked like an ancient village, crumbling stone walls and overgrown paths. Suddenly, a low growl came from behind us. We turned around, and the air felt different. A figure stepped out of the shadows, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, watching us closely. Panic shot through me, and I felt frozen. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, grabbing my arm tightly. Before I could respond, the figure stepped closer, revealing a tattered cloak that swirled around it like smoke. I could barely breathe as I realized the whispers we'd heard before were now mixed with frantic murmurs that echoed our fear. "Let's go!" I shouted, and without waiting for a response, I ran back toward the bridge. My friends followed closely behind, fear making us run faster than ever. The shadows twisted around us, as if the forest itself was alive and trying to trap us. The whispers changed into desperate cries, filling the air with urgency. When we reached the bridge, we didn't stop. We sprinted across, glancing back to see the figure fading into the darkness. Once we were out of the woods, the sounds of Hollow Creek faded away, but the feeling of dread stayed with us. When we finally got into my car, I looked at my friends. Their faces were pale and wide-eyed. "What just happened?" Mark stammered, still trying to catch his breath. We shared our stories, trying to understand what we had seen. It felt like we had crossed a line we shouldn't have, waking something that had been sleeping for centuries. As we drove away from Hollow Creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't just been explorers. We had been intruders. The legend of the village haunted my thoughts, and as we left the town behind, I promised myself never to return. Some places are better left alone, and Hollow Creek was one of them. A dark reminder that some legends are rooted in truth, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble into their grasp. I had always heard stories about the whispering woods next to our small town. People said that if you listened closely, you could hear the voices of those who had disappeared inside. Intrigued by these tales, my friends and I decided to explore the woods one Halloween night, hoping to find out if the whispers were real. As the sun set and shadows stretched between the trees, we gathered our flashlights and set off. The air felt heavy with excitement, and I got a chill down my spine when we stepped into the underbrush. Soon, our happy chatter faded, leaving behind an unsettling silence. We followed a narrow path, the trees closing in around us. Every rustle of leaves made me shiver, and I moved closer to my friends for comfort. We were all a little scared, but the thrill of adventure pushed us forward. After a while, we reached a clearing where the moonlight spilled into the space like a spotlight. It looked beautiful, but also a bit eerie, as if the woods were holding their breath. Suddenly we heard it, a soft, almost musical whisper drifting through the trees. My heart raced. Was it just the wind or something more? We exchanged nervous glances, and I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. Were these the voices we had heard about? Determined to find out, we crept closer to the sound. The whispers grew louder, forming words that we could almost understand. "Stay! Come! Join!" They seemed to call, swirling around us like a ghostly wind. I felt a strange pull toward the dark thicket ahead, as if the woods wanted us to go deeper. Against my better judgment, I led the way, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Each step felt heavier, the ground uneven beneath us. The whispers changed into soft giggles echoing through the trees. I was scared but also curious, wanting to believe it was all just harmless fun. Then we stumbled upon an old, run-down cabin. It stood in front of us, half hidden by overgrown vines and thick fog. The door hung open, creaking softly as if inviting us inside. I hesitated, feeling a sense of dread creeping in, but my friends were already edging closer, their excitement urging them on. We stepped inside, and a chill swept over us. Dust floated in the beams of our flashlights, and the air was thick with a musty smell. The inside looked like a time capsule, old furniture covered in white sheets and cobwebs hanging from the corners like forgotten memories. My heart raced as I looked at my friends. They looked just as uneasy as I felt. As we explored the cabin, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us and filling the empty space. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. Suddenly, one of my friends, Sarah, screamed and pointed toward the corner of the room. We turned to see a shadow darting past the window, leaving us frozen in place. "Did you see that?" I gasped, adrenaline rushing through me. "It's just our minds playing tricks," Alex insisted, even though his voice shook. We tried to convince ourselves it was just our imaginations, but the whispers turned to cries, echoing off the walls and drowning out our thoughts. Panic set in, and we decided it was time to leave. As we bolted for the door, the whispers turned into a loud chorus, chanting our names like they were trying to pull us back. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I panicked. We burst outside, the night air hitting us like a slap. Breathless, We ran back through the woods, the whispers fading behind us, but the feeling of being watched growing stronger. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the streetlights back in town, our hearts pounding. That night, we shared our fears, trying to make sense of what happened. But deep down, we all knew we had encountered something otherworldly. The Whispering Woods held secrets that we weren't meant to uncover. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was still watching us, waiting for the right moment to draw us back in. From that day on, I couldn't look at the woods the same way. I learned that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and sometimes the most thrilling adventures come with a heavy price. Halloween night became a reminder of that chilling experience, a lesson in respecting the unknown that still lingers in my mind. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the leaves crunched under my feet as I walked through my old neighborhood. My friends and I had heard stories about Whispering Hollow, a place known for spooky events. Curiosity got the best of us, so we decided to check it out. As the sun set, we grabbed our flashlights and headed to the edge of the woods. The air felt electric, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. The deeper we went, the louder the whispers became, almost dancing just beyond the trees. My heart raced as we reached a clearing where the moonlight cast an eerie glow. Suddenly, I saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows. I squinted, trying to see better, but it vanished before I could make sense of it. "Did you see that?" I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine. My friends exchanged worried looks, clearly as shaken as I was. Pushing our fears aside, we continued on, determined to uncover the secrets of Whispering Hollow. As we walked further into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The whispers grew louder, turning into ghostly voices calling our names. I felt a cold wind whip through the trees, and it sent shivers down my spine when I felt something cold brush against my arm. Panic rose in me, and I urged my friends to turn back. But the path twisted and turned unexpectedly, pulling us deeper into the heart of the forest. Then we heard it, the laughter of children, eerie and cheerful at the same time. We knew we were not alone. Soon we came across an old crumbling house with shattered windows and doors standing open. A creepy feeling radiated from it, and I felt drawn to explore. Inside, dust floated in the light of my flashlight, revealing remnants of a life long gone. Broken furniture lay scattered, and old photos hung crookedly on the walls. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. My heart stopped. I turned around, but there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket, urging us to stay. My friends were frozen, eyes wide, as we sensed something lurking just out of sight. Then a loud bang echoed through the house, and we all panicked. We sprinted toward the exit, adrenaline rushing through us. The whispers turned into frantic shouts, telling us to leave, to run. We burst through the door and into the night, the cool air hitting us like a splash of cold water. As we stumbled back through the woods, I looked over my shoulder. The darkness felt alive, with shadows shifting as if they were watching us leave. The whispers faded into the distance, but I knew they would stay in my mind long after we were gone. That night, we shared our stories, trying to make sense of what we experienced. But deep down, we understood that Whispering Hollow held mysteries we couldn't comprehend. Halloween became a reminder of that night, a warning against getting too close to the unknown, where whispers can quickly turn into screams. I learned that some secrets are better left buried in the shadows. The chill of autumn filled the air as I stood at the edge of Ravenwood Forest, a place known for its scary stories. Everyone said a malevolent spirit roamed the woods, waiting for anyone foolish enough to enter. Despite the warnings, my friends and I were curious and ready for an adventure, so we decided to explore the forest on Halloween night. With flashlights in hand and excitement bubbling in our chests, we stepped beyond the trees. The leaves crunched under our feet, making noise that felt too loud in the eerie silence around us. As we walked deeper into the forest, I felt uneasy, like the trees were watching us. I looked at my friends, but they were too busy joking and sharing ghost stories to notice. As we went further, the atmosphere changed. The laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence that felt uncomfortable. The moon peeked through the thick branches, casting long shadows that danced around us. Just when I thought it couldn't get any creepier, we found a rundown cabin hidden among the trees. Its rotting wooden walls and broken windows seemed to call us closer, whispering secrets of what once was. Against my better judgment, we approached the cabin and pushed the creaky door open. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of decay. Old furniture lay scattered, covered in dust as if the last people had left in a hurry. As we explored, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, and shadows seemed to sway as we moved. My heart raced as I felt even more watched. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the back of the cabin. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "What was that?" someone whispered, breaking the silence. My instincts screamed for us to leave, but curiosity kept us there. We decided to investigate, creeping toward the sound. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown. When we turned the corner, we found an old, dusty mirror propped against the wall. But the reflection wasn't ours. Instead, ghostly figures stood behind us, their faces twisted in fear. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, urging us to leave. With adrenaline rushing through us, we ran from the cabin, the forest closing in around us. The whispers turned into cries, chasing us as we stumbled through the underbrush. The shadows danced wildly, creating terrifying shapes that seemed to reach for us, clawing at our sanity. Just when I thought we'd escape, we heard a child's laughter echoing through the trees. My stomach dropped. It was the kind of laughter that made your skin crawl. We skidded to a stop, hearts pounding. The laughter grew louder, mixing with the whispers, creating a terrifying noise that surrounded us. "Run!" I shouted, breaking free from the fear that held us. We sprinted through the woods, branches scratching our arms and faces, desperate to escape the nightmare that unfolded. The path twisted and turned, but we followed the sound of our racing hearts, hoping to find our way back. Finally, we broke through the trees into a clearing. The relief was short-lived as we turned to look back at the forest. In the distance, a figure stood at the edge of the trees, a dark shape watching us, unmoving. The laughter faded into an eerie silence that echoed through the night. Shaken, we ran back to our cars, vowing never to return to Ravenwood Forest. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had taken something from us. The memory of that night haunted me, reminding me that some places are better left alone. Halloween would always mean something different to us, a warning about the dangers of the unknown and the shadows lurking just out of sight. The air buzzed with excitement as my friends and I gathered on Halloween night, ready to explore Hollow Tree Glen. This place was famous for its scary stories and dark legends. People said it was haunted by the spirits of those who had disappeared in the woods, forever tied to the twisted old tree at the center. The legends warned of voices that called out, trying to lure people into the dark. Dressed as witches, vampires, and ghosts, we grabbed our flashlights and set off, excitement making our hearts race as we walked along the winding trails to the glen. The moon hung low, casting spooky shadows that danced along the path. As we got closer, our playful chatter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence that seemed to swallow us whole. I started to feel anxious. My heart raced, and a strange sensation crawled up my spine, like someone was watching us. I looked at my friends. Their faces showed a mix of thrill and fear, but we were curious and determined to find out what was ahead, so we pressed on. When we reached the massive old tree, I was amazed by how big it was. Its thick trunk twisted and knotted, looking like a giant hand reaching for the sky. Faces seemed to be carved into its bark, each one showing sadness and pain. A chill ran through me, and suddenly I heard whispers in the air, soft at first but growing louder. "Help us! Stay with us!" "Did you hear that?" I asked in a shaky voice. My friends nodded, their eyes wide with fear. I wanted to run, but the whispers felt like they were pulling us in, like enchanting songs. One friend suggested we get closer, and against my better judgment, we moved toward the tree. As we stood before it, the whispers turned into a haunting chant begging us to stay. "Don't leave. Help us." The air felt heavy, making it hard to breathe. My skin prickled, and the hair on my neck stood on end. "Maybe we should go," I said, but my friends, caught up in the moment, wanted to stay just a little longer. Then, out of nowhere, a strong wind rushed through the glen, shaking the branches and sending chills down our spines. A cold breath touched my neck, and I turned around, but there was nothing there. Panic rose in me as I felt the darkness closing in. Suddenly, I saw a shadow dart at the edge of my vision, disappearing into the bushes. "Did you see that?" one friend shouted, his voice shaking. "We need to go now." We all turned to run, but the whispers grew louder, pleading with us. "Stay with us." The shadows seemed to move closer, and I felt something ancient and evil watching us. We dashed back the way we came, our hearts pounding, the moonlight barely lighting our path. When we burst out of the woods, we stumbled onto the main road, breathless and scared. The streetlights felt like safety. But as we caught our breath, the whispers faded, leaving a heavy silence. We glanced back at the woods, half expecting to see something come out of the darkness. But the glen stood still, guarding its secrets. That night haunted my dreams. I felt like something had followed us home, that the spirits we encountered were still lurking, waiting for the next group of curious adventurers. I shared my fears with my friends, and we all agreed to avoid Hollow Tree Glen in the future, realizing that some legends hold truth. Halloween would never feel the same again, and the whispers from that night would echo in my mind, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that dwell in the darkness. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I decided to check out the old mansion that everyone said was haunted. People talked about strange things happening there, like whispers and flickering lights. As we got closer, the mansion looked scary, with broken windows that seemed like empty eyes watching us. We grabbed our flashlights, feeling brave, and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and a chill filled the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Shadows danced across the walls, and it felt colder all of a sudden. We split into two groups to explore more quickly. My group had my best friend Mia and our adventurous friend Jake. We headed down to the basement while the others went upstairs. The deeper we went, the darker it got. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Then I heard a soft whisper behind me. "Help me." My heart raced, and I turned around, but there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mia looked pale but nodded. "Let's keep moving," she said, but I still felt like someone was watching us. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, a heavy door creaked open by itself, showing us a dimly lit room filled with dusty furniture and torn curtains. The air smelled bad, and I felt like something was closing in around us. My heart pounded as we stepped inside, our flashlights lighting up faded photographs on the walls, families frozen in time, their eyes seeming to follow us. Suddenly, Jake shouted, "Look!" He pointed at a big mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. I turned to see what he was pointing at and caught a glimpse of something. No, someone, standing behind us in the reflection. But when I turned around, the room was empty. "What was that?" I gasped, my voice shaking. Mia gripped my arm. "Let's get out of here," she urged. But just as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut. Panic surged through us. We pounded on the door, but it wouldn't open. "Help! We're stuck!" Jake yelled, his voice echoing in the darkness. Suddenly, the whispers came back, louder this time, filling the room with a mix of voices. Stay with us." Fueled by adrenaline, I threw myself against the door, and with one final push, it swung open, knocking me back. We stumbled out, gasping for air, and raced up the stairs, desperate to escape the haunted mansion. Once outside, the air felt fresh and alive, and we collapsed onto the grass, our hearts racing. We talked about what happened, still in shock. The whispers lingered in my mind long after we left, and I knew the mansion held secrets we were never meant to find out. From that night on, Halloween became a night of caution for us, a reminder that some places are better left alone, where the echoes of the past never fade away. One Halloween night, my friends and I decided to check out an abandoned mansion on the edge of town. It was known for creepy stories about ghostly figures wandering around its grounds. The thought of it made my skin crawl, but my curiosity won out over my fear. When we got to the mansion at dusk, its dark shape loomed against the fading sky, casting scary shadows. The wind howled through the broken windows, making an eerie sound that made us question our choice. With our flashlights ready, we stepped cautiously inside. As soon as we entered, the house felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind made it seem like something or someone was watching us. We explored each room, finding only dust and decay, but the tension kept building, like the house was holding its breath. Suddenly, we heard it, a faint giggle, like a child's laugh, echoing from the second floor. My heart raced in my chest. We hadn't said a word, and no one else should have been there. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, and the terrified looks on my friends' faces told me they had. We debated leaving right then, but our curiosity pushed us to keep going. As we climbed the grand staircase, the air turned colder, thick with the feeling that we were not alone. The giggle came again, louder now and closer. At the top of the stairs, a door creaked open by itself, leading into a dark room. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to follow the others inside. The room was empty, except for an old broken mirror against the far wall. When I shone my flashlight on it, I froze. In the reflection, I saw the figure of a small child standing right behind us, their face hidden in shadow. But before I could react, the figure vanished, leaving only an empty room and our racing hearts. We didn't say a word as we bolted down the stairs and out of the house, the cold night air hitting us like a punch. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the mansion, breathless and shaken. None of us could explain what we saw that night. But one thing was for sure. Whatever haunted that mansion wasn't ready to let go, and it made sure we wouldn't forget. It was a chilly autumn evening when my friends, Evelyn, Mark, and I, decided to explore the Whispering Woods. Located just outside our small town, the woods were known for ghost stories and local legends. People said that those who wandered too far could hear whispers from those who had gotten lost, warning others to stay away. As we got closer to the entrance, the leaves crunched under our feet, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you guys sure about this?" I asked, glancing at the darkening sky. "Come on, it's just a bunch of trees," Mark laughed, but I could see a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. With a deep breath, we stepped into the woods. The sunlight faded quickly, swallowed by the thick branches above us. The air smelled damp, and as we walked deeper, it grew eerily silent, like the forest was holding its breath. About 30 minutes into our hike, we found a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a small, run-down cabin. Its windows were broken, and vines crawled up the sides like fingers reaching for something lost. "This is creepy," Evelyn whispered. "I say we check it out," Mark suggested, already heading for the door. Despite my better judgment, curiosity got the best of me, and I followed. Inside, the air felt stale and heavy with forgotten memories. Dust floated in the beam of our flashlights, showing old furniture covered in sheets. It felt like time had stopped. Suddenly, a soft rustle echoed through the cabin, making us jump. "What was that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Probably just a raccoon or something," Mark said, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. As we moved deeper into the cabin, I felt a strong urge to go upstairs. It was like something or someone was waiting for us. "Guys, I think we should check out the second floor," I suggested. They exchanged worried looks, but Mark shrugged. "Let's do it. What's the worst that could happen?" With cautious steps, we climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing like a heartbeat. At the top, we found a narrow hallway with several doors. One door stood slightly open, a faint light flickering inside. "Should we?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking. "We have to know," I replied, pushing the door open. The room was small, and in the center stood an old, dusty mirror. Its surface shimmered, reflecting our anxious faces. But the light, was it coming from inside the glass? As we stepped closer, the whispers returned, clearer this time. "Help us. Find us." The air grew colder, and I felt a tugging sensation as if the mirror was trying to pull me in. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "This isn't right. We need to leave," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. Just then, Mark gasped. "Look!" He pointed at the mirror, where shadowy figures began to appear, ghostly shapes of children with sorrowful faces. "They need help!" Evelyn cried, tears filling her eyes. Before I could respond, the cabin shook violently, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. "Leave! Leave now!" Instinct kicked in, and we ran down the stairs, the voices growing more frantic behind us. We didn't stop until we burst through the front door and into the safety of the woods. Breathless, we ran until we reached the edge, not daring to look back. The whispers faded into the wind, but I knew they would stay with us forever, an echo of our encounter with the lost souls of the Whispering Woods. From that night on, we never talked about what happened inside that cabin. It felt like a secret too heavy to share. The woods remained a place of fear and mystery, and every Halloween, I could still hear those distant whispers calling out, reminding me of the darkness lurking just beyond the light. I grew up in a small town with stories about Blackwood Manor, an old crumbling estate on the edge of the woods. People said anyone who entered would never come back the same, if they came back at all. I had always been curious about it, so one chilly October evening, my friends and I decided to see if the stories were true. As the sun set and shadows grew longer, we grabbed our flashlights and headed to the manor. The air felt heavy and quiet, broken only by the crunch of leaves under our feet. The manor loomed in front of us, its Gothic shape dark against the twilight sky. It seemed to call us closer, daring us to discover its secrets. We pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. Dust danced in the beams of our flashlights, and the musty smell of decay surrounded us. The grand foyer looked like it belonged to another time, with old chandeliers reduced to twisted metal and broken glass. "Let's split up and see what we can find," Mark suggested, his voice echoing in the empty hall. Even though my gut told me to stay together, we reluctantly agreed. I paired up with Sarah, while the others went in the opposite direction. As we walked deeper into the manor, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. The atmosphere felt heavy, and I could hear whispers echoing off the walls. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, a chill running down my spine. We kept exploring, finding dusty rooms filled with broken furniture and faded portraits. In one room, we discovered a grand piano with yellowed, cracked keys. On a whim, I played a few notes, but instead of a pretty melody, the sound echoed eerily through the halls, as if the house itself was alive and responding. Suddenly, a loud crash came from where the others had gone. My heart raced as I grabbed Sarah's hand, and we rushed toward the sound. When we reached the corridor, we saw our friends frozen, staring wide-eyed at a dark figure standing at the end of the hall. The figure was shrouded in shadows, its face hidden. I felt its gaze piercing through us, freezing me in place. "What is that?" Jenny whimpered, holding onto Mark's arm. We didn't wait for an answer. We turned and sprinted back toward the exit, fear driving us forward. As we ran through the manor, I could hear footsteps echoing behind us, matching our frantic pace. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices urging us to leave. Just as we reached the front door, it slammed shut with a loud bang, trapping us inside. I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't open. Panic surged through me as a cold breeze brushed my face. The whispers turned into desperate cries, filling the air with urgency. "We have to find another way out," I shouted, and we dashed toward the nearest window. We threw ourselves against the glass, pushing with all our strength. To our relief, it finally broke, and we climbed through. I was the last one out, and as I tumbled to the ground outside, I felt a heavy presence behind me. Once we were all outside, we didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the streetlights. Breathless and shaking, we looked back at the manor. The dark figure stood in the window, watching us closely. The whispers faded into the night, but I could still feel their chilling presence in the air. From that day on, I promised myself I would never go back to Blackwood Manor. The legend of its haunting became all too real for me and my friends, a chilling reminder that some places hold dark secrets better left alone. The echoes of that night still haunt me, a warning against curiosity that might lead to uncovering more than you bargained for. As Halloween got closer, my friends and I decided to explore the abandoned Whispering Pines Asylum. It was known for its dark history and creepy stories. I had heard locals talk about strange noises and flickering lights, but I never really believed it. With 6 of us feeling brave, we planned to visit on Halloween night, excited and a little nervous. We arrived at the asylum just as the sun set, casting long shadows over the crumbling building. The moon hung low, giving everything an eerie glow. The air felt tense, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper secrets as we got closer. My heart raced as we approached the entrance. The heavy door hung on its hinges, almost daring us to come inside. Once we were in, we turned on our flashlights and saw a world frozen in time. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled old, like forgotten memories. As we walked down the dim hallway, my flashlight beam landed on faded photographs on the walls. Patients with hollow eyes seemed to stare back at us. It was unsettling, but we pushed on, eager to see more. The further we went, the stranger things felt. Whispers echoed through the halls, faint but real. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling a bit. "It's just the wind," I said, trying to brush off the growing unease. We reached what looked like the main ward, tapped with old hospital beds and medical equipment scattered everywhere. Suddenly, Jake saw something move in the corner. "Guys, over there!" he said, pointing to a dark spot. "I think I saw something." We moved closer, shining our flashlights on the shadowy area. "Probably just a rat," I said, though I didn't fully believe it. Just as we turned to keep exploring, a loud bang echoed through the building, making us all jump. It came from a nearby room, and before I could say anything, Jake dashed toward it, curiosity getting the best of him. "Wait!" I shouted, but he was already through the doorway. We exchanged nervous looks, but quickly followed him, not wanting to leave him alone. Inside, we found an old operating room filled with rusted surgical tools. But what caught our attention was a figure standing in the far corner, hidden in the shadows. "Is someone there?" Sarah called out hesitantly. The figure didn't answer but shifted slightly, as if it was considering us. The temperature dropped, and I felt a cold chill creep down my spine. "Let's get out of here," I urged, every instinct telling me to flee. But before we could turn back, the figure stepped into the light. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her face thin, like she had been trapped there for years. Her wide, sorrowful eyes looked at us. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run!" I yelled, and we bolted from the room, our footsteps echoing in our ears. As we raced down the hallway, the whispers grew louder, almost angry, urging us to stay. "Don't leave! Don't leave!" We burst out of the asylum, the cold night air hitting us like a wave. We didn't stop running until we reached our cars, panting and wide-eyed. "What just happened?" Mia gasped, still trying to process the terror we had just faced. "I think we saw a ghost," Jake said, his voice shaking. I couldn't deny it. The look in that woman's eyes haunted me. It felt like we had stumbled upon something we weren't meant to see. We drove home in silence, the night's events weighing heavily on us. I glanced back at the asylum as we turned the corner, its dark shape looming in the rearview mirror, reminding us of the fear we had faced. From that night on, Halloween would never be the same. Instead of costumes and candy, it became a night of caution, reminding us that some places hold on to their past, and the spirits within them might not be ready to let go. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I wanted something more exciting than the usual parties. Jake had heard about a haunted cemetery outside of town, and after a few beers, we all agreed it was a great idea. The crisp autumn air made our breath visible, and the wind howled through the bare branches of the trees. The moon was bright, casting long shadows that danced on the road as we drove to the cemetery. When we arrived, it felt like the wind had stopped, and an eerie silence filled the area. The cemetery gates creaked open as we pushed through, and the graveyard stretched out before us, filled with tombstones worn down by years of weather. We laughed nervously, joking about seeing ghosts, but deep down we all felt something was off. We wandered deeper into the graveyard, our footsteps crunching on the dry autumn leaves. The graves were old, with dates carved into them from centuries ago. An unsettling stillness hung in the air, as if everything was holding its breath. Suddenly Sarah, the most skeptical one in our group, froze. Her face turned pale as she pointed to a shadow darting between the tombstones. I laughed, thinking it was just her imagination, but the others looked worried. Jake, eager to show there was nothing out there, suggested we find the mausoleum he had heard about. It was said to be the resting place of a man named Theodore Blackwell, who was famous for dabbling in dark magic. People claimed he wasn't at peace even in death. When we found the mausoleum, it looked abandoned, overgrown with vines, its iron gates rusty and shut. But something felt wrong, almost like the darkness inside was thicker than the night outside. "Let's go in," Jake said, breaking the silence, but none of us moved. We were all frozen with an irrational fear that settled over us like a fog. Then, without warning, a low moan echoed from inside. It sounded like a voice, but it was so distorted that it could have been the wind, except the wind wasn't blowing. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Everyone fell silent, frozen in fear. Suddenly, the mausoleum gates began to rattle as if something inside was trying to get out. We all stared, hearts racing, and then the ground started to tremble beneath us. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We ran. Dodging between gravestones, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. But they didn't belong to any of us. Something was chasing us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw nothing, but the feeling of being pursued grew stronger with every passing second. We reached the car, breathless and scared, and piled in. Jake fumbled with the keys, and for a few terrifying moments, they slipped from his shaking hands. The engine roared to life, just as a shadow seemed to glide toward us from the cemetery's entrance. We drove away faster than I thought possible, not looking back. When we finally stopped at a gas station on the edge of town, none of us spoke for a long time. We all knew something had followed us, but no one wanted to admit it. As we caught our breath, I looked in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw the shadow again, lingering in the distance, watching us. We didn't talk much about that night afterward, but I never forgot what we saw. Even now, years later, I can still hear the rattling of the mausoleum gates and feel the weight of something unseen watching me from the darkness. I haven't gone back to that cemetery, and I never will. Some things are better left alone. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I were looking for a good scare. We had heard rumors about an abandoned farmhouse just outside of town. They said it was haunted by the ghost of a farmer who had died in a mysterious way, but no one knew the full story. Naturally, we decided to check it out. We love thrills, but none of us expected the horror waiting for us that night. The farmhouse was barely standing. Its windows were shattered and the roof sagged in places. It looked like it could fall apart at any moment. As we walked up to the front porch, the boards creaked under our weight. The air felt thick, like something was pressing down on us. My heart raced, but I wasn't going to chicken out in front of my friends. We pushed open the front door, which groaned on its hinges, and stepped inside. The air was stale and smelled of dust and decay. Our flashlights barely lit the narrow hallway, which was lined with old, peeling wallpaper. There were pictures of a family on the walls, a man, a woman, and 2 young children. They looked happy, but something about their eyes seemed to follow us and sent chills down my spine. As we walked deeper into the house, the floorboards creaked louder, almost like something below was moving with us. We laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as the age of the house, but the tension in the air grew heavier. At the end of the hall, there was a staircase leading up to the second floor. Jason dared us to go up, so we did. Halfway up the stairs, a loud bang echoed through the house, making us jump. It sounded like something heavy had fallen upstairs. We froze for a moment, exchanging uneasy glances. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to lighten the mood, even though I didn't believe it myself. We reached the top of the stairs, and an eerie quiet settled over us. The bedroom doors were closed, but as we approached the first one, it creaked open on its own. None of us had touched it. My stomach twisted with dread, but Jason led the way inside. The room was empty, filled with old furniture covered in dust. However, the window was wide open, letting in a chilly breeze, even though none of us had opened it. We moved to the next room, but as soon as we opened the door, we were hit with the overpowering smell of rot. The room was filled with old furniture, but in the corner, there was a large, dark stain on the floor. It looked like blood. My heart raced as I stared at it, but I didn't say anything. I could tell everyone else felt the same way. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. We spun around, our flashlights bouncing off the walls in panic. Jason ran to the door and tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like something or someone was holding it shut from the other side. Then the whispers started. At first, they were faint, barely audible, but soon they grew louder, filling the room. It sounded like many voices speaking at once, but we couldn't understand what they were saying. We huddled together in the center of the room, terrified, as the whispers grew closer. The air around us turned cold, and I swear I could feel something brushing against my skin. The whispers turned into loud growls. Something was in the room with us. I could see panic in my friend's eyes. Jason was banging on the door, shouting for help, but no one was around to hear us. The growling got louder, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the corner, watching us. Its eyes glowed red and it started moving toward us, slowly at first, but then faster. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but suddenly the door flew open, and we bolted out of there, practically tripping over each other as we ran down the stairs. We didn't stop until we were back at the car, gasping for breath and feeling our hearts pound in our chests. None of us said a word as we sped away from that house, too shaken to even process what had just happened. Later that night I lay in bed, trying to convince myself it had all been a prank or just our imaginations running wild. But deep down, I knew what we had seen was real. Something evil lived in that house, and we had barely escaped. We never talked about that night again, and I promised myself I'd never set foot in that farmhouse again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear those whispers. I wonder if whatever was in that house is still watching me, waiting for another chance to make me its next victim. It was Halloween, and the night felt different. I always loved the excitement of the holiday, but this year something felt off. My friends and I heard about a corn maze on the edge of town, one that was said to be cursed. They said anyone who went into the maze on Halloween night might not make it out. We didn't really believe in curses, but we were curious, so we decided to check it out, thinking it would be a fun scare. When we got there, the place looked abandoned. The only sign of life was a faint light flickering at the maze entrance. The cornstalks stood tall, swaying gently in the breeze, but there was something strange about the way they moved, like they were alive and watching us. My heart raced, but I pushed the feeling away, trying to act brave in front of my friends. As we stepped inside, the tall corn surrounded us, and the light from the entrance quickly faded behind us. We laughed at first, cracking jokes, but soon the mood changed. The deeper we went, the more lost we felt. It was like the maze was shifting, the paths changing when we weren't looking. Every turn seemed to lead us in circles, and our cheerful chatter turned into tense silence. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a scarecrow in the middle of the path. It was dressed in ragged clothes, and its face was a twisted, stitched-up mess. I felt uneasy as we passed it, its hollow eyes seeming to follow us. We kept walking, trying to shake off the creepy vibes, but then we heard something behind us, a rustling sound. We turned around, but the path was empty. Still, the noise grew louder and closer. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed. We turned to see the scarecrow standing in the path behind us. Only now, it wasn't just a lifeless figure. It was moving slowly at first, but then it lurched toward us, its arms reaching out like it was trying to grab us. Panic set in, and we ran. No matter how fast we ran or how many turns we took, the scarecrow was always behind us, its ragged footsteps crunching through the corn. My chest tightened with fear as the maze twisted around us, pulling us deeper into its grip. At some point, we lost one of our friends. Their screams faded into the night while the rest of us kept running. By the time we reached the center of the maze, we were exhausted, gasping for breath. But there, in the middle, stood another scarecrow, identical to the one that had chased us. As we tried to catch our breath, we realized we were surrounded by them. Scarecrows in every direction, closing in on us. Their hollow eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight, and they moved with a jerky, unnatural motion. Their stitched faces twisted in grotesque grins. The last thing I remember was their cold, straw hands grabbing me, pulling me down into the earth as the corn maze swallowed us whole. It was Halloween night, and I felt a mix of excitement and fear. My friends and I had heard stories about an old mansion on the edge of town, the Blackwood Estate. Deep in the woods, it had been left to rot for years. People talked about strange lights and ghost sightings there, and no one dared to go near it, especially not on Halloween. But that night, we decided to be brave and explore it. As we walked through the thick woods, the moon lit our path. The wind howled around us, almost warning us to turn back. The trees grew taller and closer together, their twisted branches looking like skeletal arms. I shivered, not just from the cold, but because I felt like something was watching us from the shadows. After what felt like forever, we finally saw it. The Blackwood estate. It looked even creepier than I had imagined. The mansion towered over us, with shattered windows and ivy covering its crumbling walls. The front gate creaked as we pushed it open, the sound echoing in the eerie silence. The front door was slightly open, and with shaking hands, I pushed it wide. Inside was pitch black, but our flashlights revealed old furniture and faded portraits of the Blackwood family. Their empty eyes seemed to follow us as we stepped into the grand foyer. "This place is creepy," Sarah whispered, her voice barely heard over the creaking floor. I nodded. It was freezing inside, much colder than it should have been, and the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. We moved deeper into the house, the floor groaning with every step. The hallways were narrow, and the further we went, the darker it got. Suddenly, we heard a noise, a faint, rhythmic tapping like footsteps. We froze, our hearts racing. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his face pale in the dim light. We stood still, listening, but the sound stopped as suddenly as it started. We exchanged uneasy glances and continued forward. It felt like the house was alive, breathing with us, watching our every move. At the end of the hallway, we found a door, an old wooden one with strange symbols carved into the frame. I hesitated, but finally turned the knob. The door creaked open to reveal a dimly lit room. In the center stood a big, ornate mirror, cracked and dusty. A sense of dread filled me as I stepped closer. The mirror was ancient, far older than anything else in the house, and something about it felt wrong. As we got nearer, the temperature in the room dropped, and our flashlights began to flicker. Then the mirror started to fog up, like someone was breathing on it. Slowly, letters appeared on the glass, spelling out a message: "Leave now." We gasped and stumbled back, our flashlights flickering wildly. My heart raced as I grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her toward the door. But before we could move, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. Panic washed over me as I yanked on the door with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The lights flickered again, and the air grew colder. We began to hear whispers, soft, eerie voices surrounding us. My breath caught in my throat as I looked back at the mirror. The letters had changed. Now it read, "Help us." A cold hand gripped my shoulder, and I screamed, spinning around. No one was there, but the chill lingered, like something had been right behind me. We banged on the door, desperate to escape, but it stayed shut. Then I saw movement in the mirror. A dark, tall figure was standing just behind us, watching. It moved closer, becoming clearer with each second. Suddenly, the door flew open, and we ran out of the room without looking back. We dashed through the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door. We didn't stop until we were far from the mansion, our hearts pounding. When we finally reached the safety of the woods, we paused to catch our breath. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We had all seen the same thing and felt the same fear. That night, we promised never to go back to Blackwood Estate. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see that figure in the mirror, watching and waiting. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear those whispers again, calling me back.